2007, I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon, with my then-girlfriend Ira, our 2 cats, 1,400 books, 82 goddess statues, and 19 plants. I owned a bike but no car, worked at a nonprofit, and ate a vegan diet. You know, your typical 20-something Pacific Northwest lesbian experience. If someone had asked me to define my gender back then, I would have used the term soft butch, for though I strutted and dressed like a man, my hair was long with blonde curls that cascaded over my shoulders and down my back. People called me Carla then. On one particular morning, I stood in my small kitchen, reading and rereading doctor's instructions. Drink 40 ounces of water in 10 minutes, approximately 45 minutes before your appointment. I chugged the water down and hopped on the bus, endured a half an hour of stops and starts and bumps as my bladder filled. When the stenographer finally called my name, I had to kegel my way down the hall just to keep myself from Once in the room, I followed her directions. Strip down to your socks, change into a paper gown, lay down on the table, cover your lower half with a white sheet. I was ready by the time she knocked. She entered the room, sat down on a small stool, and instructed me to move to the edge. I scooted down until I was about to fall off. A bottle appeared. This may be cold. Gel the consistency of KY jelly was squirted onto my swollen belly. In a parallel universe, this might have been the moment I learned the sex of my first child, but in this one, the woman was searching for signs of ovarian cancer, not life. It had been 8 years since genetic testing confirmed what I'd long suspected. I'd inherited the breast cancer 1 mutation from my mother, who'd inherited it from her mother, resulting in both of their deaths before 45. Being a carrier meant that I was as likely to develop ovarian cancer as I was to get heads if I flipped a coin. An ultrasound test was standard protocol, required every 6 months. We can't prevent cancer, but we can try for early detection. I was 29 years old. This was my 16th round of testing. The woman pushed and pushed against my stomach, and just when I thought I couldn't hold on a second longer, I was allowed to pee. Afterward, I returned my body to the table, my feet to the stirrups. This might feel a little uncomfortable, she said, handing me a dildo-like ultrasound guide into myself. It was cold. I stared at the ceiling tiles as she moved in and out, in and out. I have to leave for a minute, she said. Would you prefer to leave the wand inside or remove it? And I said, upon my return. Leave it in, I replied. She stepped out of the room. Each moment I spent with my feet in those stirrups and that white wand sticking out of me fueled my suspicion that I'd waited too long to have my ovaries prophylactically removed, the one action that would significantly reduce my risk of developing ovarian cancer. And now I was going to pay the price. The sonographer was going to get the doctor, and the doctor was going to take one look at that screen and tell me I had cancer. Sorry about that, she said upon her return. Everything all right? Just a problem with the machine. She returned to the dildo, guiding it into my canal, stopping at different angles to record images. After a few more minutes, the wand was removed, the test over. I'm not doing this again, I thought, as I returned to my civilian clothing. The results, negative, arrived in the mail 3 weeks later, but I only felt slightly relieved. Ovarian cancer is notoriously hard to detect and harder to survive. The poking and prodding that I'd undergone in hopes of finding a tumor early was of negligible effectiveness. Stories about women whose sonograms revealed nothing 1 month, only to be diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer, read bad. 2 months later were all too common. I don't want to have children, I explained to the doctor 2 months later, so I see no reason to wait to have my ovaries removed. I tried to appear calm as I said those words to him, this trim 30-something man standing before me, the first male gynecologist that I'd ever seen. I assumed that he'd look at me quizzically, question my judgment. We don't recommend the surgery for women so young because of the long-term side effects of going into a medically induced menopause, including, but not limited to, an increased risk of heart attack, weight gain, hair loss, insomnia, bladder infections, vaginal infections, depression, painful intercourse, hot flashes, night sweats, and osteoporosis. Besides, you could change your mind about wanting children. Instead, he looked at my chart and told me to take off my clothes, put on a paper robe. You can keep your socks on, he said as he left the room. My legs again in stirrups, I scooted dutifully down. He grasped the speculum, touched my vagina, and shoved it in. You have a tipped uterus, he informed me. It was my first time hearing such news. He explained that due to the angle, he'd have to insert a finger into my anus and another into my vagina to palpate my uterus. He thrust his fingers into me and wiggled about. If he was trying not to cause me pain, I couldn't tell. The sensation of his hands pushing on my pelvis stayed with me for hours. Post-exam, the surgeon recommended a complete hysterectomy, just to be on the safe side, lest cancer show up in the uterus, fallopian tubes, or cervix later on. I wanted to have the surgery done immediately, but there were so few gynecological oncologists in the state of Oregon, I was forced to schedule the surgery a few months out. Here's what I noticed while I was waiting for my hysterectomy: pregnancy. 3 friends, 2 exes, both of my sisters, a half dozen acquaintances, and even my astrologer, all pregnant. I saw some of them, their torsos growing larger and larger, and wondered, what would those women know? What would their bodies know that I wouldn't? It was one thing to go into your 30s saying that you didn't want to have children, knowing you had the option to change your mind. It's something else entirely to remove that possibility permanently. While having breakfast with Raya, I rattled off the names of everyone I knew who was pregnant. She was unimpressed. She didn't want children. For her, it was a definitive, a declarative statement with a period at the end. I sought out my adopted mother, Connie, for advice. I'll never have a child if I go through with this, I said into the phone. If you have any doubts, have a child, now's the time. Her statement sounded absurd. I couldn't just decide to have a child, yet the facts spoke for themselves. I was 29, my mother's age when she had me. I had a steady job, health insurance. I could do it, but have a child? Me? I'd never even been close enough to sperm to risk pregnancy. Besides, I told Connie, I didn't want to contribute to overpopulation or risk passing on my mutation, and I could always adopt later on down the road. What I never said, although maybe she suspected it, was that having a child would force me to face my ultimate fear, having a daughter, getting cancer, and having my daughter watch me die as I had watched my mother die, wondering, will that be me when I'm 40? My period usually came 4 days after the full moon, but a few weeks before my surgery, it wouldn't come. As the days turned into a week, I had this eerie feeling that my body knew what was about to happen. I became convinced that the child I was never going to have was giving me one last opportunity to change my mind. I found myself waiting for a sign, some indisputable sign that said, have a child. Would I walk down the street, meet some stranger who, by his mere presence, would overwhelm me with such passion that we'd run to the nearest rent room by the hour motel and in our haste unknowingly rip the condom, the result of which I'd become pregnant? Although my sex life hadn't historically involved men, I'd known enough lesbians to know these hormonally induced interludes had been known to happen. Although, to be fair, it usually involved alcohol. No stranger ever appeared as I half believed he would. When I finally started to believe, I indulged in an urge to keep some of the blood. I put the fluid into a jar that I placed in the corner of my refrigerator, thinking that I might water it down and feed it to my plants, or use it in an offering in some future ritual. After the surgery, I was puffy. 15 pounds of water weight cushioned my tumid abdomen. The fluid was pissed out over a few days. The only physical proof that something happened to me was a 2-inch line above my pubic bone and 2 1-inch lines over the space where my ovaries had been. I kept that menstrual blood from my last period in my refrigerator for 7 years. Occasionally I'd stop what I was doing and grab the container and turn the bottle upside down and watch the congealed purple-red fluid slide down the glass. One afternoon, against my better judgment, I unscrewed the lid. I put my nose over that bottle and I inhaled deeply. When it had come out of my body, it smelled like iron and earth. Now the putrid smell of the decomposing cells of my potential child seared my nostrils. Was I too scared to be your mother? I wondered again, years after the potential that answer could have any possibility of changing the outcome. I still wasn't sure. The only thing I did know for sure was that the only thing I ever gave birth to was my own uterus, as the doctor pulled it, along with my surgery, along with my ovaries, fallopian tubes, and cervix through my vaginal cavity.